Hello, everybody. This is Nathan Ware at Rain Networks. Thanks for joining us today for our part 3 in our cannabis series webinar. Glad everybody could make it today for the final installment. A little bit bittersweet for me since Harry and I kind of dreamed up this webinar series, and we've had a lot of fun, putting on the first 2 installments. And I think this one will probably be the best one because we've got some pretty interesting content for you guys today. As always, if you have any questions as we go, feel free to use the chat utility in the GoToWebinar component, and we will most certainly get to all the questions as quickly as we can. We're going to try to keep this as close to 30 minutes as 30, maybe 35 or so with questions today, but we'll get you back to work as soon as possible. So let me introduce our 2 guests that are with us today. So as always, Harry Brelsford is with us. Harry, thank you for being on the webinar today with us.
Yes, sir, and thank you for driving this idea several months ago. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, I think we've put out some pretty good info for our MSPs out there that are kind of interested in dipping their toe into the cannabis industry and working with those type of customers. I think the first 2 have been fun. We do have the recordings out there. If anybody's interested, if you missed the first 2, you want to get one of the recordings, email media@rainnetworks.com, and we will absolutely send you over the files there. But I want to introduce our special guest for today. He's going to kind of be the star of the show, and that is Luis Alvarez of Alvarez Technology Group. Luis, thank you very much for joining us today.
It's my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So we invited Luis on a webinar because we wanted to have somebody that actually is in the MSP business, that has experience in the cannabis industry, that has done kind of what some of you maybe are hoping to do over the next few years. And so we can maybe glean from Luis's experiences, learn some of the things that he did right, maybe some of the things that he feels like he didn't do quite as good as he would have hoped, and learn from his experience. So Luis, if you could, give us a little bio and some company history about Alvarez Technology Group.
Absolutely, happy to. So I've been in the technology industry for close to 30 years now. So I started when I was 5. I'm kidding. And about 20 years ago, I started Alvarez Technology Group after selling my first company. And we started as the traditional IT VAR, and eventually moved into the managed services space, and started working with clients throughout California, but primarily in the Monterey County region. We're located in Salinas, California. And for those of you that aren't familiar with Salinas, it's where John Steinbeck lived and wrote many of his books. East of Eden is one of the more famous ones. And it's a very agricultural, rural place, although we are a little more than 50 miles south of Silicon Valley, but we might as well be 5,000 miles away in terms of the influence that Silicon Valley has on how things work down here in Monterey County. But that real ag-heavy focus for us really was one of the catalysts that led to us getting involved with the cannabis industry.
So you're in an area where, let's just say, growing things is easier than in other areas, right? That would be a fair statement.
Yeah, and one of the other elements that really influenced the growth of the cannabis industry, specifically in Monterey County, is that back in before the mid '80s, this was an area that was known for its cut flower industry. This was, the kind of flowers that you buy, like roses and tulips and whatnot, that you pick up at the store. This was where a lot of those were grown, and those were grown in greenhouses. So there are hundreds of greenhouses in Monterey County that, after NAFTA was approved in the mid '80s, that made bringing in cut flowers from Central and South America much cheaper. Those greenhouses went into, got idled, and they'd been sitting around unused until California approved the recreational cannabis laws that made those hot commodities, because in California you have to grow indoors, you have to grow in a greenhouse or in a warehouse or some other indoor facility. So suddenly all of these greenhouses that were sitting around not being used became real hot commodities and all got gobbled up pretty quickly.
And so here you are running a technology business. When did it strike you like, hey, I should start talking to these companies and see what kind of technology they need? Maybe they need help, that kind of thing. When did that kind of hit you?
Well, we had already, prior to the law being changed, and which actually happened 3 years ago, November of 2016. Prior to that, we had been working with a couple of small cannabis growers and dispensaries, but it was a much smaller business with not a lot of growth upside. So recreational changed that equation, and we decided that for us, we'd already been working with traditional ag companies. So why not get involved with the cannabis industry? And we already had somewhat of a reputation of delivering good services out there. So we leveraged that, started getting really smart on the regulatory compliance side of things, because we recognized that as California was rolling out their the rules and the regulations that these cannabis operators would have to operate under, we could leverage the fact that we had that knowledge of what the compliance rules look like to attract cannabis clients, and it worked. We got real smart real fast on all the compliance issues, primarily around surveillance and access control, which was an area that we had dabbled in a little bit but hadn't really spent a lot of time focused on. But we quickly recognized that was going to be a big hurdle for new cannabis operations to overcome, because the regulations were so specific and so onerous in some cases. Cannabis growing in California is one of the most regulated industries in the world, I would say. That video surveillance and video storage and all the things related to that, and all the technology that would have to go into these greenhouses to help them operate, was an opportunity for us, and we quickly jumped on it.
Interesting. So I want to come back to this regulations thing, because that's certainly an interesting topic. But maybe you or Harry, maybe this is one that Luis mentioned that in California they have this greenhouse requirement. Is that common in the other states, or is that kind of a California thing?
It depends on the state. I am aware of that in California. In Washington State, you can grow outdoors. Luis, I think Colorado's an indoor state.
Yeah, Colorado's indoor, and that, not only is it because of the regulation, they want to control the actual product, but it's from an environmental standpoint, it's probably the only way you could really grow year round in Colorado because of the weather.
Yeah. Well, that means my home state of Alaska is clearly an indoor grow. But
and this is of course important. Yeah, this is of course important because that means, like you mentioned, surveillance and access control, those kinds of things. So that means wiring is going to need to be done. Maybe choices of cameras, all those things become different when we're talking about an indoor situation. So that's why I brought that up, because I just felt like that might be an interesting little tidbit. So, and I'm going to come back to this regulations thing because that's very interesting, but I just want to make sure, like, to paint the picture here. So you mentioned 2016, that's when the big laws are changing in California, but was that when you first started working or with companies in the industry, or was it kind of before that?
No, we had been working with, like I said, with a couple of small dispensaries for a couple of years before that. They'd come to us for the traditional, IT related things. So, hey, we need a point of sale system. We need wireless access points put up so that our POS can work. And so we started making relationships happen in the cannabis world, and actually that benefited us quite a bit, because one of the things about the cannabis industry that I've learned, at least in California, is cannabis companies and the principals in those companies like to work with people that understand their industry. That is, if they're going to hire an attorney to represent them, they want an attorney that knows the laws around cannabis and can give them good advice. If they are going to work with an insurance company, they want an insurance carrier that's going to be able to help them and understand their industry. And same thing with technology. They don't like and they won't work with people that show up and say, hey, yeah, you're just another, you're just another company to me. I can do IT for you. They want to know that I understand and our people understand what their requirements are and can protect them from themselves in some cases.
So, and how did you actually?
And
Go ahead, Harry.
yeah, Nathan, if you don't mind talking about being current in your vertical very, very quickly. I'm currently coming to you from Minnesota, a little side trip up here to Mayo and Rochester, and talking to people about medical use. And in the paper yesterday in the state of Minnesota, and Luis, you'll relate to this. So it's a medically legal state, Minnesota. And they have just authorized in the paper yesterday to double the number of storefronts to 16. Luis, that's the kind of knowledge you need, the local knowledge you need to play in this reindeer game. Does that make sense?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And, we've gotten approached by people who have learned of our involvement in the cannabis and our expertise in the cannabis space from other states. We recognize that not every state is the same when it comes to their regulatory compliance issues. So whenever we've been approached, it becomes an exercise for us to get smart really quick on what the rules are that they play in, because that's the only way that we can help them. It's not just about IT; it's about understanding how to keep them safe from whatever regulatory compliance issues might put their permits at risk. Because at the end of the day, that's what they're trying to do. Is they're trying to stay within the law so that their permits, which are issued by the state, aren't compromised.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Luis, how did you get these clients? I mean, how did you market to them? I mean, were you just picking up the phone, like cold calling them? Was there a particular marketing angle that you found worked better?
Yeah. So one of the first things we did is in California, even though the law was the ballot measure was passed in 2016. The state was given about a year until January of 2018 in order to come up with essentially the bureaucratic morass that you need to do to run an industry. And so they created the Bureau of Cannabis Control, or BCC as we call it. And so we stayed really close to what was going on with the BCC, signed up for their newsletter, signed up for all of their alerts, because we wanted to stay on top of anything that was going on, even if it wasn't technology related. We just want to know everything that was happening there. At the same time, California had a Cannabis Industry Association that we joined, as well as we joined the Monterey County Cannabis Industry Association to start talking to the people that were the decision makers that would be able to hire us or approve our contracts, those sorts of things. And we attended their meetings. We actually two of my people became involved in some of the subcommittees that they had. So we marketed by staying close to them and being the only IT company that was doing that. I was surprised, quite frankly. I thought that a lot of my competitors and people who were looking to get into the industry would be doing the same thing. But we were, when push came to shove, we were the only IT company in the room when technology questions came up. And we became the de facto experts because there was nobody else there that could question what we said.
I mean, that's super interesting. I mean, it kind of follows up to what Harry says, figure out what's going on at the local government level, because that's where you really want to live. You want to have your finger on the pulse of that. And I think it's interesting you brought up, something simple. Get on a newsletter, right? That takes somebody 5 seconds to do, and you can get that kind of flow of information coming so that you are ahead of that. Ahead of everybody else. I mean, like you said, you were the only one really paying attention, and look how it's paid off for you. That's tremendous. So good stuff there. So you start getting these clients. You start working with them, and I'm sure you have clients in other industries, law offices or insurance companies or whatever. What did you notice different about working with the companies in the cannabis industry versus a more regular, we'll just call them a regular client?
Yeah, well, the one thing, and I think Harry will agree with me on this, is this is still a very immature industry. And by immature, I mean that it's still a developing industry. So some of the folks that we were talking to really didn't understand what the rules were, that the way that we did. So we would have conversations with them about, for example, the surveillance requirements in California are pretty rigid, and it requires essentially, if you're in the cannabis industry, then you have to track on video the product from seed to sale, and you have to hold that video for 90 days. And so that was the first hurdle we had to overcome, was figuring out, well, what kind of solution do we need to build that can do that? And then talking to these cannabis operators, letting them know that, no, you can't go out to Costco and buy the $4.99 camera set and satisfy the ordinance. It just doesn't work that way, because it requires 15 frames per second, high def resolution, and so on and so on and so on. So once we educated them on what the requirements were, and what the cost was going to be, because this was not a $4.99 solution, then we had to go build it. And so we made relationships with a lot of companies in the surveillance industry that were looking for partners like us, because their traditional partners that they were working with weren't willing to use the latest and greatest technology. They were very happy with coax cameras and traditional 640 by 480 resolution. And these companies like Dawa and Hike Vision, as well as Tyco and some others, had all this technology that they wanted to start selling, and they just couldn't. And so we were a very attractive partner for these manufacturers. And so we started finding the right solutions that were exactly what they needed in order to set up their business.
So you have the cameras, you have some other like access control things. What were some other typical traits? Like, what did the network look like? What were the computer systems that they tended to use? Like, what was kind of, give us a snapshot of what a typical network looked like?
So a typical network in starting from scratch, they need broadband access, because most of their point of sale systems are all cloud-based or have some cloud component to them. There's some reporting requirements to the state that requires them to have internet access at all times. So we got smart on connectivity, made some partnerships to make sure that some of these facilities, if you can only imagine, this is a fairly rural area, and if you have a greenhouse out in the middle of nowhere, that means that the only way to get you internet access is to take fiber out there. And so we partnered with some companies that did wiring, because then they'd have to wire the buildings themselves. And then we put in traditional IT components like firewalls, access points, switches, and then PCs and servers, although most of them prefer to be cloud-based rather than have a data center, if you will, in their environment. And from there we started working on software for them, helping them pick their point of sale system, their back-end support software, and if they were storing the product and warehousing it, excuse me, we would find them software for tracking their product and being able to accurately manage their inventory. So in many ways, it was very similar to what we were doing with our traditional clients. It was just very specific to their environment.
So, and were the environments almost typically always Windows based? Did you have some Windows, Macs, mixed? What was the typical spread like on that?
So for the desktop users, it was primarily Windows, but for most of the point of sale systems use like iPads, and Apple products, because that's one of the challenges is that there's not a lot of diversity when it comes to software applications. So a lot of the folks that started in a lot of the software companies that started with the medical cannabis side of things kind of got really overwhelmed by the number of recreational use dispensaries that were coming up, and so there was some challenges getting the right kind of software, but most of that is Apple-based stuff.
Yeah, and
Okay.
yeah, and Luis, I have both a question and a comment. My experience has been the more sophisticated um, dispensaries, and I'm thinking one in San Luis Obispo County that's actually not in San Luis Obispo. It's more out by the coastline. I forget the name of the city, but I shot some video there. And so they were using a point of sale system called Trees. And in
Mm-hmm.
fact, it was based on the Macintosh hardware. And in talking with them, it was all about customer experience, right? That you had these tablet, the Macintosh, well renowned for a delightful UI UX. And so, Louise, again, I don't know if there's a question there, but that's my 2 cents, is that they were
No,
very concerned about the customer experience.
yeah, and I agree with you. And Trees is probably one of the most popular point of sale systems that is being used in cannabis dispensaries, and so we work with them pretty closely. But they're a good example of somebody that started in the medical marijuana space with not a lot of dispensaries. It had a challenge scaling to the requirements of the recreational use.
So in these companies, was there anything unique from like a security standpoint? Were they any different from a traditional customer just from a security level?
Oh yeah, I mean, physical security is paramount in these facilities. So in addition to surveillance cameras, access control was another thing that we got smart on, because they had to manage who had access to the different areas of the facility, or whether it's a greenhouse or a manufacturing facility or a warehouse. They needed to be able to record they have to record, who's accessing when. Those areas, be able to lock out those areas if somebody doesn't have the right credentials, the right badge to get in there. They have security guards that they have to have 7x24 in the facilities or in the dispensaries while they're open, to make sure that crimes aren't committed. And that took some partnerships with us, working with local security companies to find technology solutions that lets us audit and track them to make sure they're doing their rounds after hours and on weekends, and being able to monitor the cameras systems. So we were building these very sophisticated, or are building these very sophisticated viewing rooms, something similar to, if you've ever seen a movie of a casino in Vegas, these big
Oh yeah.
tons of monitors, so that they can watch the cameras
Huh.
or anything going on.
Wow. Wow. What about like any kind of encryption stuff? Do they need to encrypt drives or emails or anything like that?
So that's where the rules are now moving toward. As I said, California only had a year to really create the bureaucracy to manage the cannabis industry. So they started with regulations that they knew would have the biggest impact: the surveillance and access control, the seed to sale tracking. But now they're expanding that into additional requirements based on more emphasis on cybersecurity, more emphasis on data security. And so now we're going back to some of the folks that we originally started with, in talking to them about having those conversations about cybersecurity and about data encryption. There's some reporting requirements that are coming down the pike for reporting to the state on a more timely fashion, that will require additional devices that they don't currently have. So it's an evolving industry, and staying on top of it is actually our biggest opportunity.
Okay. So this is probably a good time to kind of connect up on the regulations thing. So you've talked about, there's like a 90-day video requirement. It sounds like that's one regulation. You gotta have 90 days video. You say it looks like encryption is coming down the pipe. What other areas? So you got this reporting thing you mentioned. Any other areas that you feel like regulations will probably land on?
Well, the surveillance thing is really something that is a big opportunity, because one of the things that we've discovered is a lot of the growers out there initially put in systems that were compliant at the time, but aren't compliant now. So we're going back to people that we hadn't worked with originally, and providing them or offering to do an audit of their compliancy to make sure that they are in compliance. But in terms of reporting, it's one of the things about the cannabis industry that's unique is it's illegal at the federal level, but they still have to file their federal taxes. So they have to pay the IRS, even though technically the feds look at it as an illegal industry. And what that means, though, is that they can't deduct certain expenses, like you and I can running a business. We can deduct, all legitimate business expenses. Well, they can't deduct any expenses.
Wow.
Yeah. So technically, they have to pay taxes on their top line, not on their bottom line. So imagine what that world must look like. So
that's crazy.
Yeah, it is crazy. So we've partnered with CPA firms who are very good at cannabis industry reporting to create ways, not that we're creating ways, that the CPAs are, create ways to dig out or carve out exceptions to that rule so that they can minimize their tax exposure. So us having those relationships means that when we talk to a new cannabis client or a prospect, we can ask them questions about, hey, who are you using for your financials? Do you know so-and-so? They're really good at minimizing the tax impact that you might have. And so having those relationships and understanding all the other regulations, not just the technology regulations, but the other compliance issues that cannabis companies, cannabis industry has, is a real advantage if you want to be in that space.
Yep.
Yeah.
Nathan, and let me add a little value here, if I may. Next week is the largest conference of all. I'll be there at MJBizCon, the 11th through the 13th in Vegas at the Convention Center. And Naomi from Dope CFO. So folks, take out a pen if you want. DopeCFO.com. So they're sort of like an SMB Nation or a Spiceworks for CPAs in the cannabis industry. They're a community. So Naomi is speaking on this exact topic on December 12th, 10:30 a.m., mjbizcon.com, dopecfo.com. Nathan, back to you.
Yeah, cool. Good stuff. So, Luis, you've obviously had a lot of success last 4 or 5 years here. Where do you kind of see it projecting forward over the next, 4 or 5 years for you? What do you think that's going to look like?
Yeah, that's a good question, and one that we have spent some time not only talking about internally, but with some of our larger cannabis clients, because a lot of the investment that's taking place in California is really about the nation. It's a lot of money is being spent, and quite frankly, the cannabis industry isn't making as much money as they thought they'd be making in California. But that's okay, because there's an expectation by many of these investors that over the next 3 or 4 years, if not sooner, cannabis sales across the state line will be legalized at the federal level. And their plan is to make California the cannabis epicenter of the nation, much like the wine industry is associated with California. They want people from across the country to want to buy cannabis grown and processed in California. So as they grow, we plan to grow with them. As you know, we have clients that are already that are based here that are buying smaller operators in Nevada, in Oregon, and in Florida for hemp, and they're asking us to go out there and do what we did for them here in those places. So we think that, you know, this focus on the cannabis industry will allow us to grow beyond just being a regional IT service provider and become a national IT service provider.
Yeah, very interesting. So, and you know, not that we want to delve into your secret sauce or you know, that kind of thing, but from a contract perspective for the MSP, does the contract that you're doing with these clients, is it, you know, basically the same as what you would do with a regular client? Are they more profitable? I mean, what, give some of these guys a little bit of a sneak peek of what does it look like at the contract level?
At the contract level, to some extent, it's very similar, right? They still have technology that we manage, but the importance of keeping their again, the keeping that permit is the number one thing that they are concerned about. And for compliance reasons, we've been able to charge a premium in making them in managing their surveillance system and access control systems, because they understand that if that goes down, they have to shut down. If they're not connected to the internet, they have to shut their doors. There's no option. So understanding that means that we can increase the fees that we charge, because we're providing a higher value service than just the traditional IT 8 to 5 Monday through Friday space. It's so far been a very lucrative opportunity.
Yeah. Well, that's pretty cool. And you know, we have an interesting you know, facet of this webinar is we've got MSPs from a lot of, you know, a bunch of different states, like not just California and Washington and stuff like that. So, you know, some of these guys are in states where they're much further behind in the process, but it's going to be a monkey see, monkey do world, right? So, you know, if other states are seeing California put out regulations on business, guess what? They're probably, oh, that's probably what we should do too, right? So this is great for these guys to kind of learn, like, what's probably coming down, you know, at their state level is going to be very similar to what you've been seeing the last 3 or 4 years.
Yeah, and I think, you know, that there's an old saying that as California goes, so goes the rest of the nation. And if and when there's a whether that's true or not, I don't know. But if and when it is legalized at the federal level, I suspect that the California model will be the one that will be used across the country in terms of if you want to be in the cannabis business, then this is what you have to do for compliance.
And actually, I think that's a pretty accurate statement. I mean, I know recently I was just reading something about you guys were recently voting on whether to change the daylight savings time deal. And, you know, here in Washington State, they were already talking about basically like, well, whatever California does, we're just going to probably follow what they do. So if they pass it, we'll end up passing it next year. So, you know, you guys are like your own little country over there. So kind of interesting stuff. So what would your advice be to wrap this up? What would be your advice to an MSP that's sitting on a phone today on this webinar that's saying, you know what, I kind of want to learn how to do this and I want to do this in my state? What would your advice be to them?
First and foremost, get smart around what rules and regulations the cannabis industry in your state has, because that's your advantage. If you understand that and you can talk intelligently to a cannabis grower or a cannabis dispensary owner about what those rules and regulations are, they're going to trust you more than if you just approach them and say, hey, I'm in IT and I want to handle your IT for you. You have to have some additional value beyond just being this, you know, a chuck in a truck that shows up and says, you know, let me handle your IT. And secondly, start to get involved in associations where the cannabis industry gathers, whether that's a local association or whether that's a regional association. It's important to be able to get in there and show that you're interested in helping them out.
Yeah. And my little thought on that as well would be, if you're interested, I mean, get in touch with Harry. I mean, this is Harry's world. He really knows how to do this. I mean, literally, Harry, you're kind of like coaching people in this industry. So I mean, MSPs that are looking to do this, you're the guy to talk to.
I am, and it all starts at 420 MSP. Hey, Nathan, I know we're a little tight on time. I have a question from one of the attendees, if you don't mind.
Sure.
Okay, so Bill White asks, and thank you, Bill, for attending. What is the name of the POS system? And I'll go first. I mentioned Treez, 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 Treez. There's another one out there called Dauntless. Luis, do you want to throw one or two names out there? But Treez is amazing.
Yeah, Treez is probably the most popular one for the cannabis industry. There are some homegrown versions of them. There's one called Viridian that we've seen in some of our clients, but it's not a super popular one. They have a complete, somewhat ERP solution to their software.
What about camera systems, Louise? Are there any camera systems that you found you like better than others?
Well, the one that I really liked, unfortunately, you can't, is now banned in the U.S., Dawa. They're a Chinese company. They actually are probably OEM the most out of all cameras. So now we're working with Tyco. They're one of the companies that we had partnered with. Their cameras are a little bit more expensive. One of the attractive things about Dawa was that they had a wide range of cameras, and they were significantly cheaper than cameras made in the U.S. But now that those aren't available, we're working with Tyco, and they have a really good product.
Yeah, cool, very good. Well, Luis, this has been just tremendous, man. You have been fantastic today. We really appreciate all the info that you've shared today. Harry, any final thoughts to put a little bow on this?
Yeah. Thank you. Two final thoughts. The moderator, the presenter, everyone you heard on this call today, we're targeting a 2-day MSP event in Denver. The revised date, we'll get communication at the first of the year to you, roughly June 2nd and 3rd. Just put a placeholder in, Denver Opera Center, a 2-day for MSPs. So want to come back at you on that. But more importantly, less than a week from today, mjbizcon.com in Las Vegas. Pop out there, guys. It's like a $399 expo pass, 50,000 attendees, I'm predicting. I already know they have 1,300 booths. So that is the mamma jamma of the business side of cannabis. Nathan, thank you very much.
Hey, Las Vegas, Nevada, Harry Brelsford. It's just going to be legendary. It's going to be, it's got a lot of potential. That's got a lot of potential. So, yeah, good stuff. And so, Harry, everybody can find you at 420msp.com if you want to connect up with Harry, kind of learn more. We kind of intended this webinar to be kind of a whet everybody's appetite kind of deal. So the next step in the process is, figure out what's going on in your area, connect with industry experts like Harry, and, get to work in the industry. It should be fun. So, Luis, again, thank you very much. This has been great. We appreciate you taking time out of your day to do this with us today.
Well, thanks for having me. I've had a lot of fun, and I'm hoping to work with Harry a little bit more this coming year.
Yep. Harry, thanks, man. We appreciate you hosting this party, and I'll probably see you in Vegas next week.
All righty. Happy holidays, everybody.
All right. Merry Christmas, everybody. Thanks for joining the webinar, and email media@rainnetworks.com if you want to get a webinar recording. Enjoy the rest of your day. Bye-bye.